If this story touched you, leave a like and subscribe to follow more. Asterisk, I never thought $5 million could disappear overnight. But then again, I never thought my wife would disappear either. The money was supposed to be our future, our escape from the suffocating grip of my father-in-law's empire. Instead, it became the catalyst for losing everything I thought I knew about love, family, and trust. My name is Michael Chen, and this is the story of how one discovery changed my life forever, leading me down a path of deception, betrayal, and ultimately, a truth so devastating it still keeps me awake at night. Asterisk, it started 3 months ago when I discovered something that would shatter my world completely. I was working late in my corner office at Harrison Industries, the pharmaceutical giant my wife Sarah's father had built from nothing into a multi-billion-dollar empire. The building was eerily quiet at 11 p.m., with only the security guards making their rounds and the cleaning crew moving silently through the halls. As Thomas Harrison's son-in-law and chief financial officer, I had access to everything, every account, every transaction, every secret that kept this company running. But that night, while reviewing quarterly reports, I stumbled upon something I wasn't supposed to see. Something that would make me question everything I thought I knew about the man who had welcomed me into his family. Asterisk, hidden deep within our encrypted financial systems, buried beneath layers of legitimate transactions and carefully constructed shell companies, I found evidence that made my blood run cold. Illegal drug trials conducted in developing countries without proper oversight. Falsified safety reports submitted to regulatory agencies. Bribes paid to government officials to fast-track approvals for medications that should never have reached the market. People had died, thousands of them, because of medications that Harrison Industries knew were dangerous but released anyway for profit. Asterisk. My hands trembled as I printed document after document, each page revealing another layer of corruption that went back years, maybe decades. This wasn't just corporate misconduct or aggressive business practices. This was systematic murder disguised as pharmaceutical innovation. The company I had devoted 10 years of my life to. The company where I had met my wife, where I had built my career and my reputation, was nothing more than a criminal organization wearing the mask of medical progress. Asterisk, Thomas Harrison, the man who had walked me down the aisle when my own father couldn't be there, who had trusted me with his company's most sensitive financial information, who called me son and treated me like family, was a monster. A calculating, cold-blooded killer, who smiled at board meetings while signing death warrants for innocent people around the world. The pharmaceutical patents he celebrated. The breakthrough medications he proudly announced at press conferences. They were all built on a foundation of human suffering and corporate greed. Asterisk, I sat in that empty office until sunrise, staring at the evidence spread across my desk, trying to process the magnitude of what I had discovered. Every medication recall that had been blamed on manufacturing errors. Every lawsuit that had been settled quietly out of court. Every mysterious resignation of key researchers. It all made sense now. Thomas Harrison had been covering his tracks for years, eliminating anyone who got too close to the truth. Silencing victims with money and threats. Asterisk, if this story touched you, leave a like and subscribe to follow more. Asterisk, I never thought $5 million could disappear overnight, but then again, I never thought my wife would disappear either. The money was supposed to be our future, our escape from the suffocating grip of my father-in-law's empire. Instead, it became the catalyst for losing everything I thought I knew about love, family, and trust. My name is Michael Chen, and this is the story of how one discovery changed my life forever, leading me down a path of deception, betrayal, and ultimately, a truth so devastating it still keeps me awake at night. Asterisk, it started 3 months ago when I discovered something that would shatter my world completely. I was working late in my corner office at Harrison Industries, the pharmaceutical giant my wife Sarah's father had built from nothing into a multi-billion-dollar empire. The building was eerily quiet at 11 p.m., with only the security guards making their rounds and the cleaning crew moving silently through the halls. As Thomas Harrison's son-in-law and chief financial officer, I had access to everything, every account, every transaction, every secret that kept this company running. But that night, while reviewing quarterly reports, I stumbled upon something I wasn't supposed to see. Something that would make me question everything I thought I knew about the man who had welcomed me into his family. Asterisk, hidden deep within our encrypted financial systems, buried beneath layers of legitimate transactions and carefully constructed shell companies, I found evidence that made my blood run cold. Illegal drug trials conducted in developing countries without proper oversight. Falsified safety reports submitted to regulatory agencies. Bribes paid to government officials to fast-track approvals for medications that should never have reached the market. People had died, thousands of them, because of medications that Harrison Industries knew were dangerous but released anyway for profit. Asterisk. My hands trembled as I printed document after document, each page revealing another layer of corruption that went back years, maybe decades. This wasn't just corporate misconduct or aggressive business practices. This was systematic murder disguised as pharmaceutical innovation. The company I had devoted 10 years of my life to. The company where I had met my wife, where I had built my career and my reputation, was nothing more than a criminal organization wearing the mask of medical progress. Asterisk. Thomas Harrison. The man who had walked me down the aisle when my own father couldn't be there, who had trusted me with his company's most sensitive financial information, who called me son and treated me like family, was a monster. A calculating, cold-blooded killer, who smiled at board meetings while signing death warrants for innocent people around the world. The pharmaceutical patents he celebrated. The breakthrough medications he proudly announced at press conferences. They were all built on a foundation of human suffering and corporate greed. Asterisk. I sat in that empty office until sunrise, staring at the evidence spread across my desk, trying to process the magnitude of what I had discovered. Every medication recall that had been blamed on manufacturing errors, every lawsuit that had been settled quietly out of court, every mysterious resignation of key researchers, it all made sense now. Thomas Harrison had been covering his tracks for years, eliminating anyone who got too close to the truth, silencing victims with money and threats. How could I tell the woman I loved that her father was a mass murderer? How could I explain that I was systematically stealing money from his company to prepare for the day when I would destroy her family? Sarah adored her father, despite his flaws and his demanding nature. She had grown up believing he was a hero, a man who dedicated his life to helping sick people, to advancing medical science for the betterment of humanity. The truth would shatter her world just as completely as it had shattered mine. Asterisk. I watched her during family dinners at the Harrison estate. Saw the way she smiled when Thomas told stories about his early days building the company, how proud she was when he talked about the medications they had developed that had saved lives around the world. She had no idea that those same medications had killed just as many people. That her father's fortune was built on a mountain of corpses that stretched across continents. Asterisk. The guilt was eating me alive from the inside. Every kiss Sarah gave me felt like a betrayal. Every time she told me she loved me, I wondered if she would still feel that way when she learned what I was planning to do to her family. But I also knew that if I didn't act, if I let this continue, more people would die, and I would be complicit in their deaths through my silence and inaction. Asterisk. 3 months after I first discovered the evidence, I had accumulated nearly $5 million in untraceable assets and had copies of every document needed to bring down Harrison Industries. I had also established contact with FBI agent Maria Martinez, a specialist in corporate fraud who had been investigating pharmaceutical companies for over a decade. She was building a case against several major players in the industry, and my evidence would be the key to bringing down the biggest fish of all. Asterisk. The morning I planned to hand over everything to Agent Martinez, I made the decision to convert all $5 million into bearer bonds and cash, assets that couldn't be traced or frozen by court orders. I had chosen the perfect hiding spot months earlier, a place so personal and sacred that no one would ever think to look there. A place that connected me to the only person who had ever truly understood me. Asterisk. Behind my childhood home, in the small town where I had grown up 2 hours outside the city, stood an ancient oak tree that had been there for over a century. This tree held memories that went back to my earliest childhood, when my grandfather would take me there every summer evening to watch the sunset and share stories about his own youth. Grandpa had been the most important person in my life after my parents died in a car accident when I was 8 years old. He raised me, taught me about honor and integrity, showed me what it meant to be a good man in a world that often rewarded corruption and selfishness. Asterisk. When I was 12 years old, Grandpa had shown me a natural hollow in that oak tree, a secret space where he kept his most precious possessions. Old photographs, letters from my grandmother, a medal he had earned in the Korean War. Small treasures that represented the most important moments of his life. After he died when I was in college, I had continued the tradition, hiding my own childhood treasures there whenever I visited home. Asterisk. Now, as a grown man facing the biggest decision of my life. I returned to that tree with a waterproof container holding $5 million in bearer bonds and cash. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was hiding stolen money in the same place where my grandfather had taught me about honesty and integrity. But I knew he would have understood. Sometimes, doing the right thing requires making morally ambiguous choices first. I carefully placed the container deep into the hollow, just as Grandpa had taught me all those years ago. The space was larger than I remembered, easily accommodating the metal case that held our future. I covered it with bark and leaves, arranging everything so naturally that even someone looking directly at the tree wouldn't notice anything unusual. This money would ensure that Sarah and I could disappear if necessary. That we could start over somewhere Thomas Harrison's influence couldn't reach us. Standing there in the fading light of evening. I thought about all the summers I had spent with my grandfather under this tree, all the lessons he had taught me about right and wrong, about standing up for people who couldn't protect themselves. I wondered what he would think about what I was planning to do, whether he would be proud of me for exposing the truth or disappointed in me for the methods I had used to get there. The next morning was supposed to be the day that changed everything. I had arranged to meet with Agent Martinez at 9 a.m. in a small cafe downtown where we could exchange the evidence and discuss the next steps in bringing down Thomas Harrison. I had copies of all the documents stored in multiple locations, safety deposit boxes in different cities, encrypted files on servers around the world. Everything needed to ensure that the truth would come out regardless of what happened to me. I woke up before dawn that morning, my stomach churning with anxiety and anticipation. Today would be the day I finally did the right thing, regardless of the personal cost. I would hand over the evidence that would expose Harrison Industries for what it really was, and I would face whatever consequences came from that decision. The money hidden in the oak tree would give Sarah and me the freedom to survive those consequences, to build a new life somewhere far from the wreckage of her father's empire. I kissed Sarah goodbye as she slept, whispering that I loved her and that everything would be okay soon. She stirred slightly, mumbling something I couldn't understand, and I watched her peaceful face for a long moment, trying to memorize every detail. I didn't know if this would be the last time I would hold her in my arms as the woman who loved Thomas Harrison's son-in-law, or if she would still love me when she learned who I really was and what I had done. The drive to my childhood home took longer than usual because of morning traffic, but I welcomed the extra time to prepare myself mentally for what was coming. By noon, I would have turned over evidence that would destroy one of the most powerful pharmaceutical companies in the world. By evening, Thomas Harrison would be under arrest, and our lives would never be the same again. But when I arrived at the oak tree, my blood turned to ice. The hollow was empty. Not just empty, but cleaned out so thoroughly that there wasn't even a trace of the bark and leaves I had used to conceal the container. Someone had found my hiding spot and taken everything, all $5 million in bearer bonds and cash that represented our only hope of surviving what was coming. My first thought was panic mixed with disbelief. I searched frantically around the base of the tree, thinking maybe the container had fallen out somehow, maybe animals had disturbed my hiding place. But the more I searched, the more obvious it became that this wasn't an accident or a random discovery. Someone had known exactly where to look, had deliberately removed every trace of what I had hidden there. My second thought was even more terrifying. The only person who knew about this tree, who knew its significance to me, who had heard me tell countless stories about my grandfather and our summer evenings together, was Sarah. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. Sarah was the only person I had ever told about my grandfather's hiding place. The only one who knew how much that tree meant to me and why I considered it sacred ground. Over the years of our marriage, I had shared every detail of my childhood with her. Every memory of the man who had raised me and taught me everything I knew about being decent and honorable in an indecent world. She knew about the hollow in the tree because I had shown it to her during one of our visits to my hometown. Early in our relationship, when I was still naive enough to believe that sharing my deepest secrets would bring us closer together, I had told her about the treasures my grandfather kept there, about how he had trusted me with that secret when I was just a child, about how I had continued the tradition even after his death. Standing there in the shadow of that oak tree, staring into the empty hollow that had once held our future, I tried to make sense of what had happened. Maybe Sarah had discovered what I was planning and had taken the money to protect both of us. Maybe she had learned about her father's crimes and was trying to gather evidence herself. Maybe she was planning to confront Thomas directly, to try to convince him to turn himself in before the authorities came for him. But even as I constructed these hopeful scenarios in my mind, a darker possibility was taking shape. What if Sarah had known about her father's crimes all along? What if she had been watching me, reporting my activities back to Thomas, helping him stay one step ahead of my investigation? What if everything I thought I knew about my wife, about our marriage, about the love we shared, was nothing more than an elaborate deception? I raced back to the city, my mind spinning with possibilities and fears, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. The meeting with Agent Martinez was in less than 2 hours, but without the money as insurance, I would be completely vulnerable once I exposed Thomas Harrison. He would use every resource at his disposal to destroy me, and without those bearer bonds and cash, Sarah and I would have no way to escape his retribution. When I burst through the front door of our house, calling Sarah's name, I was met with a silence that felt like a death sentence. The house felt different somehow, emptier, as if something essential had been removed from it. I ran upstairs to our bedroom, hoping to find her there, hoping for some innocent explanation for what had happened to the money. But Sarah was gone, and so were her clothes, her jewelry, her personal belongings, everything that marked her presence in our home. Her side of the closet was empty, her toiletries missing from the bathroom. Even the small framed photograph of us from our honeymoon that she kept on her nightstand had vanished. It was as if Sarah Chen had never existed, as if our 5 years of marriage had been nothing more than an elaborate illusion. On our kitchen table, placed exactly in the center like a piece of evidence at a crime scene, sat a single piece of paper with Sarah's distinctive handwriting. "Michael, I know what you've been doing, I know what you took, don't try to find me. This is for the best." The words were written in blue ink, in the same careful script she used for birthday cards and grocery lists. But there was something cold and final about them that made my blood freeze. I read the note over and over again, searching for some hidden meaning, some clue about where she had gone or why she had left. But the message was brutally clear. Sarah knew about the money, she had taken it, and she was gone. Whether she was protecting me or betraying me, I had no way of knowing, but the result was the same. I was alone, defenseless, and completely unprepared for the war I was about to start with Thomas Harrison. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound could have. Sarah hadn't just taken $5 million. She had taken my heart, my trust, my entire understanding of what our marriage had meant. As I sat in our empty house, surrounded by the ghost of our life together, I tried to piece together how everything had gone so catastrophically wrong. Every memory of our relationship now felt tainted by doubt and suspicion. Had she married me because she loved me, or because her father had ordered her to get close to the man who would one day become his chief financial officer? Had our intimate moments been genuine, or had she been gathering intelligence about my personality, my weaknesses, my deepest secrets that could later be used against me? I remembered how eager she had been to hear stories about my childhood, how interested she had seemed in every detail about my grandfather and the lessons he had taught me. I had thought she was just being a loving wife, wanting to understand the experiences that had shaped the man she married. Now I wondered if she had been building a psychological profile, identifying the places and memories that meant the most to me so they could be weaponized when the time came. I called her phone, obsessively, but it went straight to voicemail every time. The recording of her voice, cheerful and familiar, felt like a cruel joke now. "Hi, you've reached Sarah. I can't come to the phone right now, but leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as possible." How many times had I heard those words over the years? How many times had they brought me comfort when I was traveling for business or working late at the office? I drove to her sister Amanda's house across town, hoping against hope that Sarah had gone there, that there was some family emergency or personal crisis that would explain her sudden disappearance. But Amanda hadn't seen her in weeks, and when I explained that Sarah had left without explanation, she seemed genuinely shocked and concerned. Either Amanda was an excellent actress, or she truly had no idea what was happening. Next, I went to her best friend Jennifer's apartment, the woman who had been maid of honor at our wedding and who knew Sarah better than anyone except me. But Jennifer's reaction was the same as Amanda's: confusion, concern, and a complete lack of knowledge about where Sarah might have gone or why she would leave so suddenly. Finally, in desperation, I drove to the Harrison estate, the sprawling mansion where Sarah had grown up, and where Thomas still lived alone since his wife's death 3 years earlier. The security guards at the gate knew me, of course, but they seemed surprised to see me there without Sarah. Especially so late in the evening, Thomas met me in his study. The same room where he had first offered me the position of chief financial officer, where he had told me he thought of me as the son he had never had. He looked older than I remembered, more tired, with deep lines around his eyes that spoke of recent stress and sleepless nights. When I told him that Sarah had disappeared, his reaction seemed genuine enough: shock, followed by immediate concern, followed by a barrage of questions about when I had last seen her and whether we had been having marital problems. But there was something else in his expression, something I couldn't quite identify. It wasn't guilt exactly, but it wasn't complete innocence either. Thomas Harrison was a master at controlling his emotions, at presenting whatever face the situation required. But I had worked with him long enough to recognize when he was holding back information. He assured me that he would use all of his resources to find Sarah, that he would hire private investigators and use his connections in law enforcement to track her down. But as he spoke, I couldn't shake the feeling that he already knew more than he was telling me. That this conversation was just another performance in the elaborate theater of deception that seemed to define the Harrison family. Days passed in a blur of confusion, grief, and desperate searching. I couldn't meet with Agent Martinez because without the money as insurance, exposing Thomas Harrison would leave me completely defenseless against his inevitable retaliation. I couldn't function normally at work, jumping every time the phone rang, expecting it to be Thomas calling to confront me about the missing funds or to announce that he had discovered my investigation. Every night, I would return to our empty house and search through Sarah's belongings, looking for some clue about where she had gone or what she had been thinking in the days before her disappearance. I found nothing suspicious in her computer, no unusual emails or internet searches, no evidence of secret bank accounts or travel plans. It was as if she had simply decided one day to vanish from my life, taking with her not just $5 million but every answer I desperately needed. I hired my own private investigator, a former police detective named Robert Hayes who specialized in missing persons cases. He was thorough and professional, but after a week of investigation, he had found no trace of Sarah's movements after she left our house. No credit card transactions, no cell phone records, no surveillance footage from traffic cameras or security systems. It was as if she had disappeared into thin air. The isolation was suffocating. I couldn't tell anyone the real reason why Sarah might have left, couldn't explain about the money or the evidence against Thomas Harrison without exposing myself to criminal charges. To everyone else, I was just a heartbroken husband whose wife had abandoned him for reasons no one could understand. Then, exactly 1 week after Sarah's disappearance, I received a phone call that changed everything. It was Detective Lisa Reynolds, from the County Sheriff's Department. And her voice carried the kind of professional sympathy that immediately made my stomach drop. They had found Sarah's car, she said, and I needed to come to the station immediately to answer some questions. The drive to the Sheriff's Department felt like it took hours, even though it was only 20 minutes from my house. Detective Reynolds met me in the lobby, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair, who spoke in the careful, measured tones of someone who had delivered bad news to too many families over the years. Sarah's BMW had been found at the bottom of Miller's Lake, 30 miles outside the city, submerged in nearly 40 feet of water. A fisherman had spotted something unusual and called the authorities, and it had taken a team of divers most of the day to retrieve the vehicle. There was no body inside, Detective Reynolds explained, but the car had been underwater for several days based on the condition of the interior. The lake was remote, surrounded by dense forest with no nearby roads or houses. It would have been the perfect place to dispose of evidence, or to stage an accident that might never be discovered. The car showed no signs of mechanical failure, no evidence of a collision or other accident that would explain how it ended up in the water. Detective Reynolds asked me dozens of questions about Sarah's state of mind in the days before her disappearance, about our marriage, about any enemies or threats she might have received. I answered as honestly as I could, without revealing the truth about what I had discovered at Harrison Industries, or about the missing money. But I could see the suspicion in her eyes, the way she carefully noted my responses and watched my body language for signs of deception. They were treating Sarah's disappearance as a potential homicide, she explained, though they couldn't rule out suicide or accidental death until they had more evidence. The investigation would be thorough and would likely take weeks or months to complete. In the meantime, I should prepare myself for the possibility that my wife was dead, that she had been murdered or had taken her own life for reasons that might never be fully understood. The news of Sarah's car being found sent shockwaves through our community and made headlines in the local newspapers. Pharmaceutical heiress missing. Car found in lake read the front page of the morning edition, complete with photographs of Sarah from various charity events and social gatherings. The story portrayed her as a devoted daughter and loving wife, who had vanished without explanation, leaving behind a grieving husband and father, who were desperately searching for answers. My world collapsed entirely as the reality of the situation began to sink in. The woman I had loved for 7 years, the woman I had planned to spend the rest of my life with, was most likely dead. Whether she had been murdered or had killed herself, the result was the same. Sarah was gone, and I would never again hear her laugh, never feel her hand in mine, never wake up to find her sleeping peacefully beside me. The media attention was overwhelming and invasive. Reporters camped outside our house, shouting questions whenever I came or went. They wanted to know about our marriage, about Sarah's relationship with her father, about any problems or conflicts that might explain her disappearance. I tried to maintain my privacy and dignity, but every day brought new speculation and rumors about what might have happened to the missing pharmaceutical heiress. Thomas Harrison handled the attention with the skill of someone who had spent decades in the public eye. He held press conferences from his office, flanked by photographs of Sarah from throughout her life, offering substantial rewards for any information about her whereabouts. He spoke movingly about his daughter, about her compassion and intelligence, about how much she meant to him and to everyone who knew her. But I could see through his performance, could recognize the calculation behind his tears, and the way he carefully steered conversations away from certain topics. When reporters asked about Sarah's work at the company, or about any enemies the Harrison family might have made over the years, Thomas would deflect with practiced ease, redirecting attention to the search efforts and the hope that Sarah would be found alive. I spent the next 2 weeks in a haze of police interviews, search parties, and media scrutiny. Volunteers scoured the woods around Miller's Lake, hoping to find some trace of Sarah or evidence that would explain what had happened to her. I joined these searches whenever possible, trudging through dense forest and swampland, calling her name until my voice gave out. During one of these searches, I found myself walking beside Thomas, both of us following a trail that led deeper into the wilderness around the lake. We walked in silence for a long time, each lost in our own thoughts about the woman we had both loved and lost. Finally, Thomas spoke, his voice heavy with what sounded like genuine grief. She was worried about something in the weeks before she disappeared, he said, not looking at me as we continued walking. Something at work, something that was troubling her deeply. She asked me questions about our research protocols, about our overseas operations, questions that seemed unusual for someone in her position. My blood turned cold as I realized the implications of what he was saying. Sarah had been conducting her own investigation into Harrison Industries, asking the same kinds of questions that had led me to discover the evidence of illegal activities and corporate murder. If Thomas had realized what she was doing, if he had perceived her as a threat to his empire, did you tell her anything? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral and conversational. About the research protocols or the overseas operations. Thomas stopped walking and turned to look at me directly, his eyes searching my face for something I couldn't identify. I told her what I tell everyone who asks those questions, he said slowly, that Harrison Industries operates with the highest ethical standards, that we follow all applicable laws and regulations, and that our primary concern is always patient safety and medical advancement. But there was something in his tone, something cold and calculating, that made me understand he was sending me a message. He knew about my investigation, knew about the questions I had been asking, knew about the evidence I had been gathering, and he was telling me, in his subtle way, that anyone who threatened his empire would face the same fate as Sarah. The conversation with Thomas haunted me for days afterward. Every word he had spoken seemed loaded with double meaning. Every pause and inflection carefully calculated to convey a message that couldn't be spoken directly. He knew more than he was telling the police, more than he was admitting to the media, more than he had revealed to me during our walk in the woods. I began to suspect that Sarah's disappearance wasn't random, wasn't the result of a kidnapping by strangers or a sudden mental breakdown that had led her to take her own life. The timing was too convenient, too perfectly aligned with my own investigation into Harrison Industries. Someone had known about the money I had hidden, had known exactly where to find it, and had used Sarah to retrieve it. But the question that kept me awake at night was whether Sarah had been a willing participant in this deception or whether she had been a victim herself. Had she discovered her father's crimes and tried to protect me by taking the money before he could use it against me? Or had she been working with him all along, helping him monitor my activities and reporting back about my investigation? 3 weeks after Sarah's car was found, I received something that would change my understanding of everything that had happened. It arrived at my office late in the afternoon, delivered by a courier service that had no record of who had paid for the delivery. Inside a plain manila envelope was a letter in Sarah's handwriting, but the words it contained made my hands shake. As I read them, Michael, the letter began, if you are reading this, then something has happened to me, and the plan I put in place to protect you has been activated. I know this will be confusing and painful, but I need you to understand that everything I did was because I love you more than life itself. The letter continued, I discovered what my father has been doing about 6 months ago, long before you began your own investigation. I found records of the illegal drug trials, the falsified safety reports, the bribes and cover-ups that have cost so many lives over the years. I have been gathering evidence ever since, building a case that would be strong enough to bring him down permanently. My heart pounded as I read her next words. I also discovered that he knows about your investigation, Michael. He has been monitoring your computer activity, tracking your financial transactions, watching everything you do. He knows about the money you have been moving, and he was planning to use it to frame you for embezzlement, making sure that no one would believe your accusations against him. The truth was more complex and terrifying than I had imagined. According to Sarah's letter, Thomas had known about my activities for months but had allowed me to continue, because he was planning to destroy me completely when the time was right. He would expose the missing money, paint me as a disgruntled employee who had stolen from the company and fabricated evidence to cover his crimes, and use his influence to ensure that I would spend the rest of my life in prison. When I realized what was going to happen to you, Sarah's letter continued, I knew I had to act. I took the money from your hiding place, not to betray you, but to protect you. If that money had been discovered by my father's people, it would have been the final piece of evidence he needed to destroy you completely. But Sarah had done more than just take the money. According to her letter, she had been conducting her own investigation for months, gathering evidence that went far beyond what I had discovered. She had documented conversations with her father, photographed confidential documents, recorded phone calls that revealed the full scope of Harrison Industries' criminal activities. I have hidden everything in a place that only you will be able to find. The letter concluded. Look for the place where we shared our first kiss, where we first said the words that bound our hearts together. You will find not just the money you thought I had stolen, but also everything needed to bring down my father's empire and clear your name. I love you more than you will ever know, and I am sorry I could not find another way to protect you. The place where we had shared our first kiss. I remembered it instantly, could picture it as clearly as if I were standing there now. Eagles Point, a secluded overlook about an hour outside the city. Accessible only by a narrow hiking trail that wound through dense forest. We had gone there 2 years into our relationship, seeking privacy and solitude away from the pressures of our daily lives. Eagles Point held some of my most precious memories of Sarah and our relationship. It was a rocky outcropping that jutted out from the side of a mountain, offering breathtaking views of the valley below and the distant city skyline. The trail that led there was challenging, requiring nearly an hour of steady hiking through thick forest, but the destination was worth every step. I remembered that evening with perfect clarity. We had hiked up in the late afternoon, carrying a picnic dinner and a bottle of wine, planning to watch the sunset together. Sarah had been quieter than usual during the climb, lost in thought about something she wouldn't share with me. When we reached the overlook, she had stood at the edge of the rocky ledge, staring out at the view with an expression I couldn't read. As the sky turned brilliant shades of orange and pink, she had suddenly turned to me with tears in her eyes, and told me she loved me for the first time. The words had come out in a rush, as if she had been holding them back for weeks and couldn't contain them any longer. I had pulled her into my arms and kissed her, and in that moment, I knew that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with this incredible woman. We had made love under the stars that night, wrapped in blankets on the flat surface of the rocky ledge, whispering promises about our future together. It was the night I decided I was going to ask her to marry me, the night our relationship transformed from casual dating into something deeper and more permanent. Now, racing along the mountain highway toward Eagles Point, I wondered if Sarah had chosen that location because of its significance to our relationship, or because it was remote enough that whatever she had hidden there would remain undiscovered until I came looking for it. The drive took nearly 2 hours through winding mountain roads. And with each mile, my anxiety and anticipation grew stronger. The hiking trail was exactly as I remembered it. Narrow and steep, marked only by small wooden signs, nailed to trees at irregular intervals. I had brought a powerful flashlight and hiking gear, prepared to search all night if necessary. The forest was eerily quiet, with only the sound of my footsteps on the trail and the distant call of nocturnal birds. When I reached Eagle's Point, the familiar view took my breath away despite everything that had happened. The city lights sparkled in the distance like fallen stars, and the moon cast everything in silver light that made the rocky ledge look almost magical. This was where Sarah and I had pledged our love to each other, where we had made plans for a future that now seemed like nothing more than a beautiful dream. I began searching systematically, looking for any sign that Sarah had been there recently, any indication of where she might have hidden whatever she wanted me to find. The rocky ledge was about 50 feet across, with several natural crevices and small caves formed by centuries of wind and water erosion. I checked each one carefully, running my hands along the rock surfaces, looking for any disturbance in the natural patterns. After an hour of searching, I found what I was looking for, hidden beneath a carefully arranged pile of stones, in a crevice that was invisible unless you knew exactly where to look, was a large waterproof container, similar to the one I had used at my grandfather's oak tree. My hands trembled as I pulled it free and opened the latches. Inside was not just the $5 million in bearer bonds and cash that I had hidden, but also a comprehensive collection of evidence that made my own investigation seem amateur by comparison. Sarah had been methodical and thorough, documenting every aspect of her father's criminal enterprise with the precision of a trained investigator. There were photographs of confidential documents, audio recordings of phone conversations, financial records that traced money through dozens of shell companies and offshore accounts. She had documented the illegal drug trials in graphic detail, with photographs of patients who had suffered horrible side effects, medical records that had been falsified, death certificates that had been altered to hide the true cause of death. But the most damning evidence was a series of recorded conversations between Sarah and her father. Conversations in which Thomas Harrison admitted to everything. He spoke casually about bribing government officials, about covering up patient deaths, about eliminating people who had become threats to his operation. In one recording, his voice was chillingly matter-of-fact as he discussed the accidents that had befallen former employees who had asked too many questions. Dr. Amanda Foster's car crash hadn't been an accident after all. It had been carefully orchestrated murder. And she wasn't the only one. Over the years, Thomas Harrison had been responsible for the deaths of at least a dozen people who had threatened to expose his crimes. The final recording was the most devastating of all. It was a conversation between Thomas and an unknown associate, discussing what to do about Sarah herself. "She knows too much," Thomas's voice said with cold calculation. "She's been gathering evidence, asking questions, getting too close to the truth. We can't let sentiment interfere with business." "What do you want us to do?" the other voice asked. Make it look like an accident," Thomas replied without hesitation. "Or a suicide. Something that won't raise too many questions. And make sure the evidence she's been gathering disappears with her." Listening to that recording, hearing Thomas Harrison casually order the murder of his own daughter, was like being punched in the stomach by a freight train. The man I had worked for, the man who had welcomed me into his family, the man who had called me son, had killed the woman I loved because she threatened his criminal empire. But Sarah had been smarter than her father had realized. She had anticipated this possibility and had prepared for it, leaving behind not just evidence of his crimes but also proof of his plans to eliminate her. In addition to the recordings and documents, there was a detailed letter explaining everything she had discovered and everything she had done to protect me. According to her letter, Sarah had learned about Thomas's plan to frame me for embezzlement and had taken the money from my hiding place to prevent him from using it as evidence against me. She had also been secretly working with federal investigators for months, building a case that would be strong enough to bring down not just Harrison Industries but the entire network of corruption that surrounded it. I know that by the time you read this, I will probably be dead, her letter concluded. My father will not allow me to live once he realizes how much I know and how much evidence I have gathered. But I want you to know that I am not afraid. I am proud to give my life to stop him from hurting more innocent people. Asterisk, take this evidence. 2. Agent Martinez at the FBI. The letter continued. She has been working on this case for over a year, and she will know what to do with what I have given you. Tell her that Operation Nightingale was successful, and that the canary is ready to sing. Asterisk, Operation Nightingale. Sarah had been working undercover for the FBI, using her position as Thomas Harrison's daughter to gather evidence from inside his organization. She hadn't just stumbled across her father's crimes. She had been actively investigating them under the direction of federal agents. Asterisk, the realization that my wife had been living a double life, risking everything to bring down her own father, filled me with a mixture of pride and devastating grief. She had been braver than I could ever imagine, more committed to justice than anyone had a right to expect. And she had died because of that commitment. Murdered by the man who was supposed to love and protect her above all others. Asterisk, I spent the rest of the night at Eagles Point, reading through every document, listening to every recording, trying to absorb the full scope of what Sarah had discovered and what she had sacrificed to expose it. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, comprehensive enough to put Thomas Harrison and dozens of his associates behind bars for the rest of their lives. Asterisk, as dawn broke over the valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I made my way back down the mountain trail with the container full of evidence clutched tightly in my arms. This was Sarah's legacy, her final gift to the world, and I would make sure that her sacrifice meant something. Asterisk, the drive back to the city felt like a funeral procession, but also like a march toward justice. Every mile brought me closer to the moment when Thomas Harrison would finally face the consequences of his actions, when the families of his victims would finally have answers, when the truth would finally come to light. Asterisk, I called Agent Martinez from my car and arranged to meet her immediately. When I walked into the FBI field office 3 hours later, carrying the evidence that Sarah had died to preserve, I felt her presence with me, guiding me through the most important moment of my life. Asterisk, Agent Martinez listened in stunned silence, as I played the recordings of Thomas Harrison admitting to murder, as I presented the documentation of decades of corporate crime, as I explained how Sarah had gathered all of this information at the cost of her own life. Her professional composure cracked when she heard Thomas's voice ordering the death of his own daughter, and I saw tears in her eyes as she realized the full extent of what Sarah had accomplished. Asterisk, within hours of my meeting with Agent Martinez, federal agents were surrounding Harrison Industries, executing search warrants and arresting key personnel throughout the organization. Thomas Harrison was taken into custody at his estate, led away in handcuffs while news cameras captured every moment of his downfall. Asterisk, the evidence Sarah had gathered was so comprehensive, so damning, that Thomas's high-powered legal team could do nothing to prevent his conviction. The recordings of his voice admitting to murder and conspiracy were played in court, his own words condemning him more effectively than any prosecutor could have done. Asterisk, the trial lasted 6 months and dominated headlines across the country. Every day brought new revelations about the scope of Harrison Industries' crimes. New testimony from victims and whistleblowers who had been too afraid to speak out before. Thomas Harrison, once one of the most powerful men in the pharmaceutical industry, sat silently in the defendant's chair as witness after witness described the suffering his greed had caused. Asterisk, the families of people who had died because of Harrison Industries' illegal medications finally had their day in court. They testified about losing spouses, children, parents to drugs that should never have been approved. Drugs that Thomas Harrison knew were dangerous but had released anyway for profit. Asterisk, Dr. Amanda Foster's family learned the truth about her death, that she had been murdered because she had tried to expose the truth about patient safety. The other victims of Thomas's violence were finally identified, their families finally understanding what had really happened to their loved ones. Asterisk, when the verdict came down guilty on all counts, Thomas Harrison was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. As the judge read the sentence, I thought about Sarah and wished she could have been there to see justice finally served. Asterisk, in the months that followed, I used the $5 million to establish the Sarah Chen Memorial Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting families affected by pharmaceutical misconduct and corporate crime. Every day, I receive letters from people whose lives have been touched by the foundation's work. People who have found hope and healing through the legacy of my wife's courage. Asterisk, I kept our house for a while, but eventually, I couldn't bear the memories that filled every room. I moved to a small town in Colorado, far from the pharmaceutical industry and the corruption that had destroyed so many lives. I work now as a high school mathematics teacher, finding peace in the simplicity of numbers and the hope I see in young faces. Every year on the anniversary of Sarah's death, I return to Eagles Point to remember her and to honor the sacrifice she made for justice. I tell her about the lives her foundation has helped, about the families who have found peace because of her courage, about the changes that have been made in the pharmaceutical industry because of the evidence she gathered. Sarah never betrayed me. She saved me, even though it cost her everything. She gave her life to protect innocent people from her father's greed, and she ensured that his crimes would finally be exposed regardless of what happened to her. The money was never really gone, and neither was she. Sarah lives on in every person helped by her foundation, in every corrupt corporation held accountable because of the precedent her case established, in every truth that refuses to stay buried no matter how powerful the people trying to hide it. Love, I learned through the darkest period of my life, is not just an emotion or a feeling. It is a choice, a commitment, a willingness to sacrifice everything for the people and principles that matter most. Sarah chose love over loyalty to her family, truth over comfortable lies, justice over personal safety. She was the bravest person I have ever known. And though I will never stop missing her, I am grateful every day for the time we had together and for the legacy she left behind. In a world where corruption and greed often seem to triumph over decency and truth, Sarah proved that one person's courage can make a difference, that love and justice are more powerful than money and influence. Her story continues in every life touched by her foundation, in every family that finds justice because of her sacrifice, in every person who chooses to do the right thing even when it costs them everything. Sarah Chen died a hero, and she will be remembered as one for as long as people believe that truth and justice are worth fighting for.